All right. Now, 6:33 p.m. Thursday, January 21st, I'll call the Board of Selectmen meeting to order. This meeting is being recorded. This is a workshop meeting with the Board of Selectmen to discuss conditions of a possible LIP with, or proposed LIP with developer on the Shingle Hill project. At this meeting, we will be discussing terms and conditions of that LIP for the purposes of having a discussion with the developer next week. This is a time for the Board of Selectmen to have discussions among ourselves. I will not be taking public input of any type at this meeting. All right, so we also have a Finance Committee meeting that's going to be starting at around 7, and a little bit after that, Greg Federspiel is going to have to leave and go to that meeting, but we do have John Whitten with us here tonight. John Whitten is the exception to my rule of the public because he's acting as a town attorney. So, board members, so board, we have the list of possible endorsement conditions that we've talked about in the past. The objective for tonight is for us to come to agreement on the overall broad statement that each of these conditions makes. We do not need to refine the language of the statements. We don't need to get too deep into the details. We can get into that after we've had our first round of discussions with the developer with these conditions in front of both of us. So I should say that we have received last night an email from the developer indicating some options with regard to municipal water compromises and sewer compromises, and some possible in-kind reductions to the number of units built. Not going to go into the details of that right now. I will say that the developer has expressed a desire to be able to get a draft agreement to review in the next few weeks and have a finalized agreement by the end of February, and a signed LIP application to accompany that. So I just wanted to make clear that we have received that communication. I sent that out to the other board members when I got it early this morning. Our goal right now is to simply get the conditions sorted out so that we can get to the meeting with the developer next week to see where we go from there. All right, so we have the possible conditions for the 40B broken into the 3 main areas: fiscal impacts, environmental impacts, traffic impacts. Well, 4 areas. There are some and other impacts. And I want to take each of these somewhat in turn. I do want to have some discussion among us about density tonight. And I want to take some of them that I think we might be able to get to a conclusion quicker on first. So for example, the environmental impacts. So these are areas where we can express conditions that the zoning board couldn't necessarily impose. And we know that there's considerable concern among the residents and from MECT about the environmental impacts of this particular site. So I'd like to go after the environmental impacts first, get to an agreement on the broad terms, and then move on to possibly to traffic impacts. Board members okay with this approach?
Sounds good to me.
Is your idea, Eli, to bring up fiscal impacts at the end?
Well, fiscal impacts and density at the end, yes.
Okay.
Eli, there are
Yes.
huge questions there. Do we really need to push that to the end? Or you want to deal with the low hanging fruit first?
Exactly.
But I think at some point we're going to have to prioritize these, and I think doing it by category, we need to consider whether this is a good idea, something critically important, as opposed to just, oh yeah, we support that.
Sure. Fair enough. I don't know that we necessarily need to do it when we cover the when we're agreeing to the broad conditions, though. We can do that step afterwards. We can prioritize them afterwards.
Eli, I do have a question about when you're talking about the environmental aspects. Are you talking about things such as what the wetland scientists might come up with, or are we talking about, for example, it being LEED certified or high energy efficiency, those kinds of things? I'm just wanting a little clarification where we're going for the starters.
The impacts that are mostly within the draft conditions that we've already talked about. So not so much the potential environmental study impacts, more focusing on what we want or would want out of a development if the development were to go forward, if it, notwithstanding any other environmental concerns that might hobble the development. If the development were to go forward, the sorts of constraints like no net gaining, nutrient loading beyond the boundaries of the project parcel, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So I will say that one of the things that's I think is missing from the environmental impacts that we discussed before is with regard to water consumption and irrigation. And we had a recommendation that we ask that there be no irrigation outside of what's needed to support new plantings, and to design the plantings using native species, or species native to the area that are more likely to fit in and might not need as much support from irrigation. So I would like to add that one back into this list here, if that's all right with you.
I would also like to amend that to use native species, which need not a lot of water. Does that make sense? Or
Yeah. So the other conditions you folks have already seen and reviewed. Are there additional conditions that you think should be put into this category? Do you feel this category is sufficiently covered by the conditions that we have in our draft right now?
Eli, if I may make a comment or ask a question, of course, we're sitting here and we don't know all of the regulations and limits that are posed by the DEP and the EPA and all of the other regulatory bodies that will govern what's going on in this area. And we don't know how that relates relative to what our comments are, because our comments were not put together necessarily looking at those regulations. In some instances, the regulations may be more stringent. In some instances, they may be less. We don't know that, correct?
That is correct, and that is why we have John Whitten here to help us.
Okay.
Do any of those fall under the purview of the ZBA?
Mr. Whitten, could you expound on this if you would?
Sure, and good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. So where there is federal or state law that requires a more restrictive or more burdensome approach, those will always supersede the municipal jurisdiction. So we don't have to worry about whether there is more aggressive state or federal law, because that will apply no matter what the board does. The Board of Appeals is issuing a decision, but that is framed by the statutory requirement that the board cannot impose conditions that render the project uneconomic. And when we did the workshop last summer, we discussed that. It really is the most central part of the statutory scheme. So uneconomic for a rental project is defined by the subsidizing agency and from HAC decisions. So it's really a bright line. The Board of Appeals cannot impose conditions that the applicant would be able to demonstrate render the project uneconomic. And as a general rule, we can calculate that based on what the project costs are versus the project rental income. So to answer the prior question about the Board of Appeals, they can impose any condition that they want, but they are always mindful or need to be mindful of that bright line. The Board of Selectmen through this process don't have a bright line. You're negotiating in good faith as public officials. You're not encumbered by this concept of uneconomic. Now, of course, reality is if the board were to require too much, the applicant will walk away. But that's always been on the table. So the Board of Selectmen, the Select Board, can negotiate the terms and conditions that you believe are in the best interest of the town and leave the details to the Board of Appeals, where they will have to worry about, did we go too far? You don't have to worry about that, short of how far can you go before the applicant's simply going to pick up and go away. And you know, that's part of any good negotiation. If I could add just one more thing, Mr. Chairman, I think because density is the most central aspect to all of the board's conditions that you're discussing, that really is where you want to get to, because there are some conditions, whether it's 2 units or 200 units, you would impose regardless. But for the most part, the majority of conditions that you're focusing on are a function of density. Whether it's traffic or wastewater or impact on vernal pools, they really have a density connection to it. So I think in terms of framing the conversation, and whenever the board gets to it, you don't have to go in any order, but I really do think that is going to be the most central conversation, because from an applicant's perspective, that's what they're listening for.
Thank you, John.
Sure, thank you.
So
Assuming that we go with this list, how, and assuming that we've agreed that this is all going to end in February, we won't have the vernal pool information in February. And we've been urged to take up everything at once. So can we put in some sort of condition that the environmental study will not uncover environmentally sensitive areas?
You could, that's certainly permissible. One straightforward approach is the applicant shall, for example, I'm just throwing this out, that the applicant shall not request any waivers from the Manchester Wetlands bylaw, for example. So then we know the more restrictive wetlands bylaw that Manchester has adopted, which is far more restrictive than the State Wetlands Protection Act, is a condition of approval. So that is one approach. That doesn't resolve all the environmental issues, but it's a step forward. So there might be other local bylaws, local conditions that the board feels are so important and so overarching that could be a condition of approval. No waivers shall be requested from. And that is one way to get to the issue of, we don't have the endangered species habitat delineated, we don't have the vernal pools certified. That would be a step in that direction. The applicant, remember, can ask for waivers from any local bylaw through the Board of Appeals. And the Board of Appeals decisions on those waivers go back to that uneconomic test. So to the extent that these are important issues to the select board, now would be the time to make those a condition of your negotiation.
Okay, so we should add that they will ask for no waivers from the Manchester Wetlands Protection Act bylaws.
To the board, I'll make the point that if you ask for that, you might as well not talk about anything else, because we can't build the project adhering to all the Manchester local conservation bylaws. So you don't even have to talk about fiscal or traffic or any of that, because if you do that, it's tantamount to it's non-starter. There's no project. So just as an FYI.
So, Mr. Engler, I've got to say, when I said that I wasn't going to be taking public input at this meeting, I'm afraid I included you. This meeting is a meeting between the board members. It's open to the public. You're welcome to be here, obviously. But we're going to go through our initial list of conditions. And when we sit down with you next week, then we'll go through these conditions, and then we'll have this discussion about which conditions you think are unworkable and which you will accept. And then we'll have that argument. This week, we're not going to have that discussion. All right. Any other items on the environmental impact?
I have a
Yeah, go
Oh,
ahead.
I'm sorry.
Go
Go ahead, Don.
John, you go first.
Yeah, okay. I've got one question. One thing that's missing on this whole list, and it's because we don't know very much about it, is the septic system. And I don't know what we should request or require. I know that certainly the state requirements are fairly stringent and very specific about what you can and cannot do when you're putting in a septic system. So I'm operating a little bit in the dark here, but it makes me a little uneasy that we haven't addressed that at all. And that is probably the biggest environmental issue that's going to be involved in this project, as to how that fits in here and what it's doing to our water supply, et cetera.
So I think we did try to express a constraint on that in item number 2, where we said no net gain in nutrient loading beyond the boundaries of the project parcel. I think that was the intent, part of the intent, that it was intended to be a broad constraint that would prevent pollution of the local environment, either through organics. And as far as the septic system itself, that is something that the zoning board and the Board of Health would be still have sway over. And Mr. Whitten, could you check me if I'm wrong in any aspect there?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. So if it's a groundwater discharge permit, meaning they are not able to connect to the Manchester system, so let's assume that. Because of the volume of wastewater will be over 10,000 and certainly therefore trigger a groundwater discharge permit from the Commonwealth, that supersedes Board of Health jurisdiction. So consistent with what we were just saying in terms of the local wetlands bylaw, if there is a local Marion Board of Health regulation that is relevant to nitrogen loading or phosphorus loading that the select board don't want to see waived by the Board of Appeals, then that should be the same approach you take as we just discussed with the wetlands bylaw. Because the Board of Health will not have jurisdiction when they apply to the Commonwealth for a groundwater discharge permit. DEP sits in sole judgment over the entirety of the wastewater treatment plant proposal from beginning to end and throughout the entirety of the project. So if there is a local bylaw that relates to nitrogen loading, for example, phosphorus loading, monitoring of groundwater on a quarterly basis, things like that, then that should be one of the conditions the select board identify now. If you don't, and again, we're in the same position we were when we were talking about the wetlands bylaw, and if it gets to the ZBA level, then it's going to raise the issue of do those conditions render the project uneconomic? And that's what you don't want to have happen, because then the ZBA is in a compromised position. That is the whole purpose of the LIP, is to protect the town from an appeal of a ZBA decision.
Okay. Well, the no net gain and nutrient loading was intended to cover originally that particular topic. And if that needs to be strengthened or clarified, I'm happy to do that. I don't want to go too deep into the details, but if you'd like to flag that particular item in some way so as to convey that, John, not John Whitten, John Round. Now would be a good time to do that. You're muted, I think.
Yes, I'll flag that. I want to come back to that at some point here and see where we're at. I think I need a little bit more input here.
So Eli, if I may,
Yes, please go ahead.
so I'll circle back with the Board of Health and Ellen and just review what standards, if any, that they have for large systems. I think they usually defer to the state standards for large systems, but I will double check that.
Other comments, John?
I'm good.
Becky?
Under the environmental impacts, number 4 that we talked about, or that's on the list, potentially, is to place permanent conservation easement on remaining unbuilt lands, which says 18 plus of the 23 plus. However, looking at the plan, does that include the location of their septic? Is in other words, does the 5 acres that's ostensibly being used, does that include the leaching field, the whole septic area?
Well, I think the intent was to sort of twofold. One was to, well, actually, it was really mostly to ensure that whatever was not built on now wouldn't be built on later. So
Right.
If there's a leach field in there, it's not going to be built on.
Right.
But you raise an interesting point, because if the conservation easement, there's a version, a long distant future version of this where conservation easement is placed on something not including the leach field, and then some different future septic technology or sewer hookup is done, and then that leach field is no longer needed and then not covered by a conservation easement. John Witten, do you have any guidance on that aspect?
So I think because the site plan is still in such generalized sense, I would say to be more generic in your condition, which is any land not used for buildings or parking or related appurtenances shall be restricted for the longest period allowed by law. And the reason to not use the phrase conservation restriction is the conservation restriction process requires the Commonwealth to sign off on it. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So I would leave it to something more vague like the longest period permitted by law, which in Massachusetts is a conservation restriction. It's perpetual, but I don't think you have to actually use those words. The Board of Appeals can impose that as a condition if that is part of the LIP agreement. And then I think that will still accomplish what you're seeking to accomplish, which is the building footprint and the appurtenances are developed and everything else is to be restricted.
If I may, I have a concern with that. Septic systems fail, regulations change. And I would think it would be appropriate for us to leave them enough land so that they could in fact rebuild the septic system if it were needed. And having something under a conservation restriction or for the longest period possible seems a little unfair if in 25 years the regulations change and suddenly they need something that they don't, and every piece of land is restricted beyond their current footprint.
And I agree, Ms. Harrison. I think that's an excellent point. I guess the inclusive in my description of the built area would be the replacement leach field that DEP is going to require because of the size of the system. But your language is, you're absolutely right. You can provide more latitude. And that's why I think maybe we're both saying kind of the same thing. I wouldn't be too specific here. Your goal is to preserve as much of the parcel as possible. And maybe that's left best to a more detailed site plan. But your language is absolutely right. Maybe there's going to be an alternative wastewater technology that's going to need a different parcel of land.
Is there a way that could be, well, I'm sure there is a way, but if that could be written in somehow, so that would be, allow for an extenuating circumstance?
Yes, when DEP approves a groundwater discharge permit, they always require for a large project like this or a larger project, a replacement leach field because leach fields do wear out, so to speak. So that is always part of their approval process. And that would be, at least in my vision, that would be part of the built area, not subject to the CR. The Commonwealth wouldn't approve a CR for something that's going to constantly be redeveloped and additional infrastructure is added anyways. So that's why I say I think we're all kind of saying the same thing. Your goal is to preserve anything that's not developed,
Right.
but we just don't have the footprint of what's going to be developed all that fine-tuned yet.
Okay, thank you. That's all from me at the moment.
Eli, I have one point that I wanted to make. And I know that we're not trying to wordsmith this document at this point in time, but keep some broad strokes going. I just think it's really important on both items 1 and 2 that we specify that it's during and post-construction. My understanding is that stormwater runoff is highly regulated during construction. But we're talking about both during and post.
All right. Um, John Witten, we did have a request from some residents who had gone through the experience of having some development done in that region before, and concerned about the impact of the longer range, the more distant range impact of blasting and the actual construction process. And I think we had asked at one point for some advice on what condition we might need to or want to ask for in here to cover that outcome.
So North Shore communities typically would consider pre-blast survey requirement, and then that provides a baseline for nearby or proximate foundations. So the pre-blast survey would identify properties within a certain radius. The board could specify that, but I think you should defer to experts to provide the board with that kind of guidance. Once that pre-blast survey is done, then everyone knows the status of their foundation and structures before any blasting takes place. Then the other condition is the board can require, and the Commonwealth does require, a posting of a surety in case something goes wrong, but the board could require more. These conditions are perfectly permissible at the Board of Appeals level because they are part of the development process in the North Shore. So this is the one area where I would say the select board could be very, very general and leave the details to the ZBA once the ZBA has more information. I'm not saying you have to, but I think you could, and I think that you would be safe in doing so. So for example, the applicant shall prepare pre-blast surveys as required by the Board of Appeals, and the applicant shall provide surety requirements as provided or required by the Board of Appeals. And I think for this issue, that's probably good enough. Because I'd be afraid if you got any more specific, we would leave things out or we'd be under-inclusive. And I would say let the Board of Appeals do that.
All right. I think that covers the last of my additions to the environmental impacts list. Other board members?
Yeah, what is the state of gray water capture in the state? The last I heard, gray water had to be held underground and could never resurface.
John Whidden?
Massachusetts has a reclaimed water policy. I'm forgetting the regulatory site. I'll look it up as we're talking. So a percentage of gray water can be used if DEP approves of the same. There are limitations as to where it can be used. Can't be within a zone 1 to a public supply well, can't be within a zone A to a surface water body. I believe, and if I'm wrong, I will figure it out before we adjourn tonight or next week. I believe it's 20% of the water can be reclaimed water, which can be used, gray water can be used for irrigation and other non-consumptive purposes. I'll try and be sure that that's correct, but I'm pretty sure that's right.
The requirement in that same section 7, no potable water used for landscaping. If depending on the state of gray water, we may be saying that there can be no irrigation whatsoever, and that's strikes me as being a little over the top.
True, we had meant to include for, except as needed to establish new plantings. When you say over the top, can you qualify that?
Okay, with the language that you just described, I'm okay, but I think we need to allow them to use potable water to establish new plantings, or it's going to be a desert. And I think requiring that the development have no plants is unfortunate.
Eli, I've seen where other developments have used portable water tanks for helping to establish plants. And there are those water bags that can be put around the base of trees when trying to establish them. But if what we're talking about is having native species which don't require a lot of water, then perhaps less water would be needed to establish as well.
I don't think.
But again, I've seen other developments where they've used portable water trucks.
Yeah, but where does the water come from?
As long as it's not potable water from,
From Manchester, so it's okay to use everybody else's potable water?
no, I'm saying that perhaps they can use the gray water. Doesn't have to be potable water to establish a plant.
I think that is actually covered in the language that we have right now. No potable water use for landscaping or irrigation, except as required for establishing new plantings. I think that's.
Okay, that's not what the sheet I'm looking at says, but
Well, I see it does say that gray water capture for non-potable uses, semicolon, no potable water used for landscaping / irrigation. Is that not what you have, Ann? Under 7?
my question is how much of the gray water can be reused? And I think John spoke to that.
Right.
So is there a pending question here, or are people satisfied? Can we move on?
Fine.
I think that covers it for the environmental side at this point. So traffic impact. So the main items that we have discussed regarding traffic were around support of a shuttle to reduce traffic into town and to reduce the impact of parking in the downtown area. At various times, people have asked about a sidewalk going into town. We've discussed it. We haven't gone into any detail. The current design of the project doesn't have a sidewalk going up their driveway. But we have discussed it, and it is something we should probably cover tonight. And also, we had intersection improvements per the recommendations of peer-reviewed traffic studies. Those are the three main ones that we have on our list to discuss tonight. Are there any others that people want to add in that board members want to discuss tonight?
How about, I know there's been discussion about, from the traffic study regarding the boulevard aspect versus non-boulevard aspect. And what about the potential possibility of putting in speed tables to help keep the speed slow? That was I thought the traffic study did have a little concern about the speed at which some of the vehicles might be going.
Greg, do you have any input to offer there?
Sorry. So the question of the median strip and then the speed of the road, you know, the consultant that did the review had some concerns about speed.
Mhm.
There are ways to, whether there are ways to design the road so it encourages and sort of mandates a slower speed. That may be somewhat in competition with making sure that the fire trucks can get up and down readily. So we have to be a little careful there. So I don't think you're ready for those kind of details right now, but we could certainly put in a provision that says that we further analyze that subject to our traffic consultant might suggest.
Okay, because I think, I know the road varies at the grade, and it's what, 7.5 at its steepest. And according to Chief Cleary, as long as it's under a 10% grade, right?
Right.
Okay. I'm just thinking that that's something that would be good to consider, is ways to keep the speed controlled as much as possible.
Becky, do you mean speed on the driveway or speed on School Street at the driveway entrance?
No, just the access road,
Mhm.
for the development. Because that was one of the things that the traffic reviewer pointed out.
So you're talking about measures just on their winding access road, not on School
Correct.
Street.
Yes, I'm not talking about, well, no, I'm not talking about School Street. I mean, it'd be nice to keep everybody doing the proper speed limits, all of us. But that's not where I'm going at the moment.
Okay, so tentatively, some condition around speed control measures on that access road.
Yeah.
Okay, let's just leave that one hanging for a minute. We'll come back to that.
Okay.
Eli, if I could, I thought the main issue in terms of, well, there were two issues in terms of the access road. One was whether another access road was necessary. And we got a very unclear picture of that last time when we talked to the traffic consultant. And whether, I guess it's what's referred to as the boulevard, with the median strip that has breaks in it versus an open width of road were the two issues that we were talking about in regard to the entranceway. I think getting into the issues of traffic mitigation on that road, it's not a public road. I think that's beyond the scope of what we should be getting into. We have other fish to fry.
Um,
I'm not sure I agree with that, because when we talk about certain aspects that fall under the purview of the planning board, which would be width of road, length of road, the cul-de-sac itself, things like that. If we don't address those and those come before the ZBA, they're more limited as to what they can do. Or am I not getting that right? Probably for John Whitten.
John Whitten, could you can go ahead and answer her question? Also, can you, so at the same time, can you talk about the safety issues? So there have been safety issues raised by residents, or concerns raised by residents regarding the single access road in and out. And to what degree does the ZBA have the scope to cover that in the safety of that in their review?
So the ZBA absolutely has jurisdiction over the statutory scheme, which includes health and safety, preservation of open space, preservation of the really the health and safety of the residential units themselves. The problem is that in the 40 some odd years of Housing Appeals Committee decisions, it is rare and exceptionally rare to find the HAC upholding a municipality who denies or conditions an approval based on public health and safety issues. There are exceptions, but they are only exceptions. So the ZBA, left to its own devices, will be limited in how it could condition, for example, a second ingress and egress if the applicant doesn't want to provide it. The ZBA would be limited in its ability for a wider road or better curbing or anything that has an economic factor, which just about everything does. Having said that, that doesn't mean that the ZBA won't be able to assert its authority to make sure that the residents and public safety officials can access the property safely. But when push comes to shove, we have just too much history in the Commonwealth where the Commonwealth has ignored municipal concerns of health and safety. So I think from that perspective, the select board really might want to weigh in. The more you weigh in, the less you're putting that obligation on the ZBA. The downside, of course, is you just don't have all that information. So it's going to be, I think, a delicate balance. But I think that any confidence that Manchester or any other town in the Commonwealth that isn't consistent with local needs has, that it can deny a project, a 40B project, because of health and safety considerations, is extremely risky and very dangerous because of the track record over the past 4 decades. So I would never advise a Board of Appeals to deny a comprehensive permit unless they have lined up sufficient expert testimony to say that life will be imperiled. And part of that equation is going to be the fire chief. And the fire chief's testimony is really important here as the chief public safety officer. So I think you don't want to leave it to the Board of Appeals solely, because they are dealing with comprehensive permits with one hand tied behind their back.
In that general area, and I'm sorry, reverting back to environment, one of the things that has been talked about is using granite curbing on the access road for the purpose of constraining runoff. that's certainly an extra cost feature. Should that be something that the selectmen ask for, or is that something that's in the weeds and the ZBA ought to be able to deal with it?
I'll give you my opinion, but it's totally up to the select board. I think that is specific enough to leave to the ZBA. But that is your, I don't want to interfere with your judgment. I think because the devil in the details really requires the plans that we don't have, plans and profiles, cross sections. I think that's a condition that the ZBA could comfortably assert. Granted, curbing in and of itself won't make a project uneconomic. It's the other conditions, cumulatively. So I don't want to detract the select board from imposing any condition you feel is appropriate, but that is one where I think you're on safe footing if you left that to the ZBA.
Thank you.
All right, so we need to discuss still need to discuss the safety concerns. We have a reasonable expectation from our residents that we're going to discuss the safety concerns of that road.
Mhm.
Before we go digging into that morass.
For what?
Can we talk about the shuttle and views of board members regarding sidewalks?
Eli? I don't necessarily have something on sidewalks right now, or at least not at this point, but I would like, with regard to safety for a left turn into this access road, I think we should have a left turn lane. The traffic study said it could be widened. I think we've got to be a little more aggressive than that and really build in enough space that there is a third lane that would be in the middle to provide for a left turn.
This is the left turn lane on School Street?
School Street going north, right?
Yes. Mhm.
Right. Have some lane markings so people know that they can go around, because that's at a point where people are starting to pick up a pretty good speed heading northbound on School.
Yep. Speed limit there is 35, right?
That's what's posted. Well, maybe it's 40.
I'm pretty sure it's 35 there right now.
Okay. It becomes 40 shortly after that.
Yeah, I think once it gets towards, but not until you're out of Manchester. Doesn't it go 40 after Manchester?
45.
Yeah, it's
40 first and then 45 and then 40.
Okay.
in any event, I think a left turn is appropriate. Left turn lane.
Yeah.
Other board members on topic of the shuttle and or sidewalks?
I mean, I think it's a nice idea for the shuttle. I don't think we should be, that's not going to be, in my opinion, a huge factor. I would love it if people would use it, but I think that enabling that to be an option is a good idea. And as far as the sidewalk goes, I know that, given the pitch of the road, a sidewalk is going to be, and the width of the road, it's going to be hard to get a sidewalk, but I think it's really important to have a sidewalk that goes from the development down to School Street, and we should provide a sidewalk, or there should be a sidewalk along School Street as well. People walk along there anyway. Be nice to make it a proper walking area.
Greg, what are the state entanglements with respect to running a sidewalk through there?
We would need to get their permission for that. I don't think that's a huge lift, but it's something we would need to do.
Does it, if you provide a sidewalk, would it, or if the development provides a sidewalk, does it have to be ADA accessible? Because if that's the case, that's out of the question, because I believe it's 5% max pitch for ADA, right?
Well, public sidewalks are required to meet ADA. I would have to defer to John about sidewalks on private land.
Yeah, no, this would require ADA compliance because it's part of, first of all, it's part of a public process and it is open to the public, even though it's private land. So it would be ADA compliance. Your traffic engineer would be able to provide the details, in terms of what the grade can be. But yeah, the entirety would have to be ADA compliant.
And can you do a less formal path? Is that possible as opposed to a like a paved or block, some pervious block walkway instead of having something built in?
That's not, not in my wheelhouse, Becky. I don't believe so, but that's where I think your traffic engineer could be helpful. The building commissioner as well, because it's both ADA and state building code. But I don't know. I don't think so. Just given the rigidity of the ADA, I doubt it.
Yeah, and they definitely, no, it definitely can't be, it 5% pitch is the maximum for ADA.
Yeah.
So there's no way they could do that then.
Unless you do switchbacks of some sort.
But isn't there a lot of, I guess it could be on the side across from where all the retaining wall is.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the site is very difficult. No
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
I guess the
I just
question,
think it sets them apart even further if they don't have any way to get to town other than a car or possibly a shuttle.
Yeah, in my mind, it makes the shuttle even more critical.
Yeah.
Mhm.
the issue that I see, the big concern that I have regarding the development and the number of cars that it has, and not so much the initial traffic in the morning, but that impact of that parking. We have serious parking problems in the downtown area. We've been wrestling with those for years. And mitigating that impact is pretty important, I think.
Yep.
I mean, we've
I
discussed.
think the shuttle is a critical piece to mitigating your
Yeah.
impacts on the downtown. And again, it might be in conjunction with CADA that we create a loop system.
Well, somebody suggested having, and I don't know if this is potential or possible, but a path somewhere on the property that leads from the development down to School Street. I mean, we are a very walking oriented town community. And I just think that walking, biking should be options.
Well, how much do we want to push on the walking if we think there potentially, if it's going to be very, very hard to achieve that, should we be focusing our energies more on the shuttle and
Yes, okay.
bicycle sport? I'm not convinced that bike support would be, the uptake would be high on that. Just based on my years in town, I think you're right. People tend to walk more, but they really
Mhm.
so I am leaning much more towards focusing pretty hard on the shuttle requirement.
Eli, if I could comment on this, the issue of the sidewalk and sidewalk extension. Currently, if my memory serves me well, and seems to be working okay today, the sidewalk comes up on the far side of School Street. So any sidewalk configuration that came out of the project would have to cross School Street to pick up on the sidewalk on the other side of School Street. To construct a sidewalk along the west side of School Street would be impossible, not impossible, but incredibly expensive, because it would require a reconfiguration of the road at the bridge going over 128. So I think that the whole business of sidewalks and sidewalks coming off the property because of ADA and sidewalks approaching the property, and even this walkway coming off the property that may or may not be ADA, subjected to ADA provisions, that's all well and good, but I don't think that we're going to get there. And the idea of the town shuttle, I would hope that that would be something that would be used. Although I don't even know if that's going to happen. This is a very car-oriented community. And I think there should be some provision in, if we're going to request the shuttle to be set up and a regular contribution be made to it, that there's a review of ridership, so that we're not asking that this be done and that the town is committed to it for just a few riders.
I agree that the sidewalk does seem an onerous, as much as I think it's really important. I don't know that it could be done. But while we're on traffic, Greg, did we ever get the auto turn? I never saw that.
It did come in. They sent it, I think, late yesterday, and we'll get it up on the website and get it out to everybody.
And what about the winter conditions, the handling plan? I never saw that either.
Yeah, they sent that in as well.
Okay.
So those are two new additions that we have, and we'll get those up.
Thank you.
I'm going to sign off and head over to the other meeting, but I'll catch up.
Okay. Bye, Greg.
Bye.
So Eli, who's taking notes and recording all this then? Is that Gail's getting it? You're muted, Eli.
Look at that. So this meeting is being recorded, so that the outcome, and I talked to Gail before this meeting. She's going to
Yes.
generate.
I wish I knew where that was happening, but
All right.
Don't ask.
So I don't think any of us are particularly jumping up and down about maintaining on the sidewalk condition at this point.
Wait,
As far as the details around the contribution of the shuttle and terms of the shuttle, I don't think we necessarily need to have those completely sorted out tonight.
mhm. Looks like we have to strike number 2 then.
I think so. So, any requests regarding intersection improvements that we want to consider before we get into the larger topic of safety concerns?
Well, you mean other than the left turn lane that John brought up?
I added that to the list.
He did also the traffic study person, for lack of a better word, also said we could do the edge speed reduction markings, that could help in terms of speed control.
John Wooden, so these are edge speed markings that were either on the access road or I guess they're on the access road.
On the access road, yeah.
Where do we define whether or not we're getting, decide whether or not we're getting into the weeds here, John?
This strikes me as one of those conditions. I think best left for the ZBA. They'll have more detail from their own peer-reviewed traffic engineering. There'll be more time to study it. I would say, Mr. Chair, that's that one, similar to the curbing, important, but I would leave that to the details of the ZBA.
Okay. That's,
So it's my understanding that in terms of traffic impacts, we have the issue of the annual contribution to a town's shuttle and the left turn lane.
Currently, and we're discussing whether or not we wanted to include any intersection improvements per the recommendations of the peer-reviewed traffic studies. And then we still have to discuss safety concerns and whether or not we wish to place any conditions based on the traffic study that was given to us.
So the intersection improvements, one of them was the whole issue of the roundabouts at the 2 entrances onto 128. I don't know of any others that were specifically recommended by the traffic consultant. Go ahead, Beck.
I was just gonna say, I thought he said something about pitch at the coming out of the development onto 127 under the School Street.
I think
Is
you
there-
did. I think we could gather that up in the safety item.
Yeah. I would say that let's incorporate his, because he said it, there was good sight lines, that was not of concern, right?
Right.
Mhm.
I'm trying to bring that up right now,
So the roundabouts, one of the concerns that I have is I suspect that those are sitting right in the middle of state territory.
I assume that they are.
Yeah. So I don't know how difficult it is going to be to actually make forward progress on those with respect to putting them in place.
Didn't he say that was something we do through the state, though? Right.
I'd like to see that get onto the town planners and the DPW's radar to investigate that further and perhaps do a specific engineering study for those two roundabouts. You know, we did the little roundabout experiment down at the end of Pine Street, which was not well received. But this is a very different matter in terms of the way that people come through there, the speeds at which they come through there. But I don't think that has anything to do with this project.
I agree. There isn't much evidence that they contribute significantly to the congestion there, and the congestion is going to increase whether or not, and yeah, this is a town issue and not a development issue, in my opinion.
Fair enough. We have a lot of other territory to cover. All right, so now we're on to the safety concerns on the road. So does anybody have any opinions that they would like to offer?
Do you mean on the road, the
Yeah.
access? Well, it was mentioned that the cul-de-sac should be made smaller, but I don't, that's probably also for ZBA, I would think.
Smaller?
Yep.
There were there were several sets of concerns raised by, you know, residents and to some extent by the traffic engineer. There's the large item of single access in and out. And whether or not it would be better if there was a second access in and out. It's been indicated that it's not really feasible in this project to put second access road in there. We're free to make whatever conditions or ask for whatever conditions we want here. Obviously, some are simply not going to fly or won't be agreed to. I guess I'd like to get opinions from board members about
I think the developer has already said that that is absolutely impossible and he won't do it. And if we're trying to present a group of requests that we hope we can reach agreement on, is that consistent with requiring something that he's already said he won't do? Or does that just shut us out and we say, okay, fine, go with the unfriendly?
well, I think canceling the negotiations based on one access road or no is not really not really in the best interest of the town. John Whitten, if the Zoning Board of Appeals, through their safety studies, feels that the lack of a second access road represents too great of a safety concern, they can still appeal that to the HSC, right?
Yes, the only way to preclude the applicant from appealing to the HAC would be if that were a condition of your LIP endorsement. So that would preclude an appeal because now contractually the applicant has agreed not to. But yes, other than that, any condition of the ZBA can be appealed to the Housing Appeals Committee.
Regardless of where we came down on safety concerns here, the ZBA could still deny, after they got their traffic safety review, they could deny the application if they found that the safety concerns are too great.
Correct.
At which point the developer would need to appeal that decision to the HAC.
That's correct.
So it seems like, given our understanding of the finances and the particular layout of this particular project and our other goals, if we are to negotiate a friendly here, is we should focus on other safety concerns that the zoning board might not otherwise have purview over, or
Mhm.
yeah. So were there other concerns for safety on that list from the traffic safety engineers that board members feel like we ought to weigh in on?
Perhaps the width of the road. I know, I don't know if that's more weed stuff, but one of the things he recommended was, for roads, and I quote, serving more than 120 units, a paved width of 34 feet and maximum grade of 6% is required. However, and that's out of our own laws, but the 6%, as we know, is not going to be doable. But I don't know if it's possible to make it a wider road. I think also sight lines, again, we haven't gotten that information. But the sight distances, if we could nail some of those down based on what the traffic study showed.
I don't know that we're going to be able to nail much of anything in detail down there, simply because those plans don't exist yet and can't exist for quite some time.
Yeah.
John Whitten, any guidance?
Not really, Mr. Chairman. I think this is where we knew we'd be. You don't have enough information, but you have an application. So no, I think I would leave issues of road width and construction materials, leave that to the Board of Appeals.
Okay.
Would we also leave the issue of median or no median to the Board of Appeals?
I would. I think that's part of the same. We just don't have sufficient detail to impose those conditions unless there's some overarching minimum condition that you demand be included, that you're worried that ZBA will be running into the uneconomic argument. I would leave those traffic infrastructure, those kind of site planning decisions to the Board of Appeals.
So if the Board of Appeals in their site planning decides that the road would be better if it were wider and met, for example, the more stringent requirements of our traffic safety engineer. And the developer disagreed and appealed those conditions to the HAC. The HAC would then typically decide in favor of the developer.
Yes. Oh, undeniably, yes. And just to add to that, when an applicant appeals to the Housing Appeals Committee, the Housing Appeals Committee hears the matter from the beginning, de novo. It's as if nothing ever happened at the Board of Appeals other than the issuance of a decision. So it's rare that an appeal to the Housing Appeals Committee is over a single issue, unless that single issue is the be all and end all. So what would happen is the appeal would be of the entirety of the ZBA's decision. And then the hearing before the Housing Appeals Committee, de novo, starts from the beginning as if there was no hearing before the Board of Appeals. So that's why we really, you want to avoid that if it's avoidable. In some cases, it's not. You know, some things have to get litigated. But that's why I say I think there are some conditions best left to the ZBA because they will have the details and the information upon which to base a detailed decision. And you're at that disadvantage because you don't have those details.
So if we wanted to weigh in on the safety concerns of the road, would a method of being able to do that be to condition the developer that they will not appeal the project or they will not appeal decisions from the zoning board regarding width or certain other parameters of the access road?
You certainly could. You could narrow kind of that general condition that I suggested earlier to any condition relating to health or safety or traffic or road construction shall not be appealed. Yes, you could. You absolutely could.
And the broader condition that you suggested earlier, would cover any appeal?
Mhm.
Yes, yes, yes. Hardly one that the applicant is going to embrace without some further conversation, I would imagine. But yeah, that would be the applicant shall not appeal any decision of the Board of Appeals to the Housing Appeals Committee. That would be a condition of your approval.
Seems likely to be the end of conversation.
Most likely, not always. I'm working on a LIP now in another community where the applicant had agreed to that and DHCD approved it. But I agree with you. I think that's the exception, not the rule. But it's part of the discussion process.
Well, I mean, the discussion's not going to end before it even gets started. There's no utility to the developer to walk away without arguing over some of these and seeing if we can come to compromise position. So perhaps if we leave the broader condition in and see where we land in our initial conversations, that would be the most practical option for us right now.
So are we including talking about the parking garage and those sort of recommendations?
Can you be more specific?
Well, the peer review talked about the dead-end parking bays, the backing obstructions, and the structural columns as problematic.
Yeah, I think that's,
So that goes ZBA.
that is all part of the ZBA's, yeah.
Okay, and under safety, what about all of Chief Cleary's recommended safety standards in terms of fire? I'm having a problem with words today. Sprinklers and alarms and placement of fire hydrants and things like that.
Mr. Chair, if I could just comment on that, all of those would be part of the ZBA process because the fire chief is going to demand them pursuant to the building code and the fire code. So I think you can leave those out.
Okay, thank you. I'm just CBA. Okay.
So
Okay.
I think where we were going with that was to put in the generic condition that the developer will not appeal any decision of the zoning board of appeals, and leave the zoning board of appeals to deal with the safety issues of the access road after they've got the details that we don't have and can't have, and have completed their traffic peer review.
The problem with that is that if we don't say, I don't think the ZBA is in a position to say our decisions can't be appealed. So I think if there's something specific that we don't want to have appealed, we need to, not necessarily tonight, but during the discussions, once the developer has said, as he probably will, no, I won't agree not to appeal the ZBA on anything, then we come back and say, well, here are the 6 things that we think are important, and we would like you to agree not to appeal these specific decisions by the ZBA. Does that
That's
seem
right.
like a way to proceed?
Yes, that's right.
Mhm.
It allows us to get it further into the discussion with the developer. Without necessarily having to try to impose very specific conditions right now that are difficult for us to reach based on the limited information that we have.
Do we know if there's this probably comes under fiscal impacts, but for the parking, if there's going to be a charge for parking underneath?
What at the development?
Mm-hmm.
I'm a little confused as to why that would be a concern of ours.
Just in terms of outdoor parking, if there's people are potentially going to try to be finding places to park outside, and there's limited parking.
At the development?
Outside, limited outside parking, yes, at the development.
Why do we care?
For if it's, I'm just thinking of for low income, if you've got low income or affordable housing rather, and parking, is there any preferential parking for non-affordable housing? Is what I'm getting at, making sure it's all equal footing in terms of parking availability.
You have any, you encountered this concept before?
Not for rentals, but for sale units, yes. I don't know about rental. That's why I'm asking, is if rentals are deal with it the same way as some sale units.
John Whitten, do you have any?
I have seen as an option, you pay more to get covered parking. I would say this is a really good example of one for the select board to defer to the ZBA. Just because you don't have that information, we don't know what the applicant is proposing. I would defer that one.
Thank you.
All right, I think that we have I think we've covered under traffic impacts what we can. I think where we came down, and I'll just go back, recapitulate, and folks can, board members can say if they agree. So broadly, we want to talk about an annual contribution to support a shuttle run from development into town, a shuttle loop. We want the developer to support a left turn lane on School Street heading north. And we decided that we, under the other impact section, we have the item that says agree not to appeal the agreed to conditions to the state and agree not to appeal the ZBA and comprehensive permit as the broader conditions, thereby allowing the ZBA to weigh in on the safety aspects of the access road. That's where we landed right now. What we took out of there were any consideration around sidewalks and intersection improvements that we think are really going to be more the business of the town going forward.
Did we talk about the slope of the access road going in down to School Street? Or did we decide that was a ZBA thing?
Said that I said that we probably wanted to group that in with safety. However, John Whitten might want have something to say. And also, is there a particular reason why you're concerned about that as opposed to general safety issues on the access road? Or is it a safety issue as far as you're concerned?
I think we've discussed sight lines, speed control, notes someplace, road width, medians. This is one piece of that whole thing that I don't remember our having gone over.
Not in detail.
Because I think sooner or later we're going to be making suggestions to the ZBA of things they might want to think about. And just having the notes that include what we've discussed.
John Whitten, as a matter of process, yes, the Board of Selectmen may provide information to the zoning board on issues that we have concerns about. Those are not part of the letter of endorsement. Is that correct?
Correct. The letter of endorsement is the application to the state. So the Board of Selectmen would be providing its lip endorsement as a contract that goes to the state, which then becomes the project eligibility letter if the state approves it. Once the application for a comprehensive permit goes to the Board of Appeals, the statute requires that the Board of Appeals seek, among other boards' comments, yours. So that's where you get to weigh in on the greater level of detail. You'll be providing advice only. It won't be binding on the Board of Appeals, but you will have an opportunity to weigh in on all of the aspects of the project once they apply to the Board of Appeals for a comprehensive permit.
All right. And that,
I wanted that to be in the notes. It's in the notes. That's fine.
fair enough. All right. Under anything else under traffic impacts? We're working our way slowly over to the fiscal impacts and density.
But I think we need to do the other impacts if we're going to do the easy stuff first.
Yeah, I completely agree. So there are two items under the other impacts, and one of them is actually under fiscal, but we'll leave it under it. I think we can leave it under other impacts. So one is under the design. So we've received a fair amount of feedback from residents and some extent other boards, planning board, suggesting that the profile of the building and aspects of the building should be designed more to fit the character of the town. And I tend to agree. I'd like to constrain it in some respect. We did receive some fairly detailed descriptions from Gary Gilbert. Question is, how do we, first of all, do we want to weigh in on that here? And then we're going to have to ask John Whitten for a good way to express that in a condition at this level. So board members, you want to weigh in on how, whether or not you think it's appropriate for us to place some sort of condition here regarding the design to express character of the town.
Yes, I do.
Mm-hmm.
John Whitten, if we were going to constrain the developer along those lines to address aspects of the design that concerned us, breaking up of the roof lines, and the materials being used, given that we don't have the final design plans and can't for some time, how would we go about doing that?
It's tricky with design. So the board could articulate what it doesn't like and could express what it would like to see. But unless there is exhibit A to point to, here's what we want it to look like, or something like this, it's very hard to narratively design a project, So I think this is where, Gary's expertise or other expertise in town could be really, really helpful. I think the select board could identify what it doesn't want to see, whether it's a flat roof or whether it's 4 stories or those kind of macro issues that would then require the applicant to come back with plan B. But I don't think you should spend your time for this process trying to redesign it, because you really can't unless you have something to point to. So I think you could express your disinterest in certain aspects of the project, macro issues, and require the applicant, when it does file with the Board of Appeals, to meet those general design guidelines. Or if there's a specific design flavor that you're looking for and you can identify it as an attachment, we could do that as well. I would say, because DHCD is going to have to approve this, let's keep it as simple as possible, because DHCD is not gonna want to get into the weeds of a detailed decision that articulates how the roof line should look, or the window treatments. They won't deal with that. They'll reject that. So I think I would stay on big issues like the bulk of the building, the height of the building, the orientation of the building, things like that, the treatment. And I would try to leave the other details to the Board of Appeals.
Okay, so in that vein, so I'm going to think about this from the very near term. Obviously, sorting out the specific language of any constraint or that we want to place there tonight. We're not going to have time to do that. That's not going to be a reasonable thing to do. Next week, we're going to sit down with developer. We want to lay out roughly for the developer the areas that we have concerns and want to place some constraints. Is it reasonable for us to put a very, very broad, just put a stake in the ground to the developer saying, we're going to want to put a condition here with some very broad concerns about the look of the design, and then come back to the developer with more details on that at a subsequent meeting.
Eli? So
Yeah, Jeff.
I think it makes sense to perhaps gather, I don't know, a half a dozen broad things that we're interested, whether it's materials or appearance, et cetera, so that the developer has kind of a handle of where we're going. I mean, right now it's a clean sheet of paper. And to go from 0 to 60 miles an hour and say, we want this, I think that's a little tough. But if we put down, you know, just a few things that have been kind of a consensus over the past several weeks, I think that makes sense. I mean, from my perspective, I would like to see one less floor, and I'd like to see a roof line. I think those are pretty broad types of comments, but it gets thinking in that direction.
All right. We're going to get into density really fast as we go into this issue, this particular issue. Let's push this aspect of the conversation off just a hair and get back to the other impacts. Let's move on to the local preference for 70% of the affordable units and reduced to 60% by AMI for half of the affordable units, or all of the affordable units. That was one of the early topics that was raised by the Affordable Housing Trust. Let's discuss this one. This one's going to actually end up blending in with fiscal to some extent, and it definitely impacts the profitability of the development. The local preference, honestly, because it's only the first round of rentals, I don't know how much I really want to hang on to that one. I guess it makes sense to hang on to it because they're probably, they'll be rented in and they'll be available for some time.
I'd like to see us keep that one it's a benefit, short term, it's a benefit to the town.
Right.
It doesn't cost the developer anything.
Cost the developer anything, yep.
And, it's something we can say that we're actually doing that makes this project better for the town.
I agree.
And as to the second half, I'd like to know exactly how much, and the developer has given us a schedule of rents and how much this, that, and the other, and I have transferred some of it to a spreadsheet, but there's some information I don't have to evaluate it, but I think that reducing to 60% of AMI for half of the affordable units is not a huge cost. And again, it would be something that would make the project more attractive to the town, making units available to people who find the current proposed rates for the affordable units shocking.
Yeah,
It makes them
And-
affordable.
Yeah, it makes them
Or
some
more
of, at
so.
least some of them more so. And I can probably with Sue Brown and to make sure that I understand there's some definitions, I can take, how many units at how much is assumed to be vacant, and I think it's just a question of some units are 20% less. A relatively small number of units are 20% less.
Mhm.
I don't think we can put that, I don't think we can ignore that because it is a direct cost to the developer. So I'd like to work on that a little bit more before our next meeting.
And to that end, I have a question regarding, I know we've got 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, and 3 bedroom, but the 1 plus bedrooms, I'd like to know definitively how many units would be the 1 bedroom if, based on the 157, and how many are the 1 plus, because that can also factor into potential school-age children.
um,
And that was something that was brought up in the fiscal impact study that our peer review.
okay. So
I guess.
that's not a question I'm going to be able to answer for you tonight. So what, and how's it going to impact our discussion tonight?
It's going to impact under fiscal. Sorry, I jumped.
Okay. So the 1 plus versus 1 units.
Mhm.
All right, come back to that. So on the AMI number, 60% of the AMI for half of the affordable units. Half versus all is half or versus some other number. That's a number that, Anne, you would like to.
I would like to play with. There is an open meeting law problem. I can produce the stuff, but I can't discuss it.
Right. Well, so our meeting with the developer is on the 27th, our first meeting with the developer. We'll have other meetings after that. There are options. We actually are capable of posting another meeting for us to speak before that meeting. We can still post a meeting for the 26th, since we were able to post one way or another, I think we can post a meeting tomorrow. I think we can manage to do that. So if we wanted to meet and discuss it, we could. Or we actually could post a meeting for the 27th in the morning, and we could post that meeting Monday. So we do have the option as a board to meet one more time before we sit down with the developer for the first time.
I think that would be a very good idea for several reasons. One being that I would like to look at the printed list, not only look at, discuss the printed list of what we've resolved tonight before we walk in.
Yeah. I think the developer probably would be desirous of having that list before he actually sits down in the meeting. But John, wouldn't you see any problem with us giving the list to the developer for the first time in the meeting and discussing it to him there?
I don't, Mr. Chairman, no. I mean, just mark it, the word draft in 24-point font. But no, I don't see a problem with that.
Can I get a clarification on what the issue is that we would need to discuss next Monday or Tuesday?
So our current, one of the other impacts, one of the conditions that we talked about is reduced to 60% of AMI for half of the affordable units. So right now the developer is sitting at 80% of AMI, which doesn't make them particularly affordable. And so what Ann wanted to do was run some additional numbers on the impact of saying 60% of AMI for all of the units versus just half of the affordable units under a couple of different scenarios before she comes to a decision about whether or not we should support 60% of the AMI for half of the units or all of the units as a condition. And she would, we would benefit from being able to give Ann a little bit more time to do a little bit more analysis on that and then discuss it before we go into the meeting with the developer. Or we could tell the developer, we want to reduce the number of the AMI to 60% for some number of the units. And that number, we will come back to you after this first meeting. We can do that too. That's why we're discussing whether or not we want to meet one more time. Plus Ann wanted to have us finish up the editing and have the printed version of the final list and have an opportunity to discuss it before we actually sit down with the developer, since we're working with very much a draft and modifying it in this meeting as we go.
Okay, thank you.
So broadly, people are still in favor of the 70% local preference for 7% of affordable units and reduced to 60% of AMI for some number of affordable units. That number to be determined. Is that fair?
Mm-hmm.
Jeff?
Yes.
All right. Let's get up now into the fiscal impacts. Now we're going to be starting to talk about density. And I know that there are different opinions about density on many different levels. So, well, let me ask board members this. It's 8:30 right now, and we're going to continue with this discussion because we have to. Does anybody need a bio or water break before we dig into this next topic? All right. We will take a 5-minute recess. Is that all right?
Yes, please.
5-minute recess for everybody to discharge and recharge, and we'll be right back. It is 8:27, 8:28, 5 minutes from now.
Right. Oops.
Okay, it's 8:33. Oh, we don't have Jeff back yet. Or do we have Jeff back yet? Nope. All right. It's not yet 8:33. There we go. All right, 8:35, and we're back in session.
Thank you for that opportunity.
You're welcome. Okay. Let's get into fiscal impacts and density. The big nut, so to speak. So there's different opinions about density. We had asked some of our peer reviews to build numbers and build scenarios around the 157 units that the developer proposed, and also 120 units, which was the calculation that we had, which still put us over the 10% SHI number that would allow us to have some protection from any future 40Bs. And the opinions have raged back and forth about whether the number should be far lower than that or higher than that, or where. And so I'd like to go around board members and first take temperatures overall on their opinions of density. So I'll just pick somebody. John Round, you want to go first?
I can. Thank you, Eli. And I would like a clarification from John Whitten before I comment, and that's with regard to the Code of Mass Regs, Section 760, which deals with the Department of Housing and Community Development and the definition of a large project.
So
And-
in Manchester, a large project is greater than 6% of your housing units. And I believe that leads to the number, I could be off by 1 or 2, but I think it was 133.
It's
So-
about that, 135, yes.
135. Okay, so what that would mean is any application to the Board of Appeals greater than that number, 135, could be denied or conditioned with, approved with conditions, and the developer would not have an appeal to the Housing Appeals Committee.
Okay, so the interpretation is if a project is larger than that size, the developer is in some jeopardy.
Correct. The developer is filing knowing full well that it could be denied or it could be conditioned with very expensive, approved with very expensive conditions, and the developer would have no appeal at all to any body. You would have to accept the
Right.
decision or walk away.
Right. So it, in general, is probably in the developer's best interest to be below that threshold and deal with other issues and take the size issue off the table.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
I don't know one developer who would ever file over what's called the large project threshold, unless there is some preordained agreement, which, you know, would not be the norm. So no, the developer's always going to come in below that threshold.
Okay. Okay. So this,
So
all right.
follow
Eli?
up with a hypothetical just on that one particular point. Hypothetical is this. Suppose that the Board of Selectmen provided a letter of endorsement for the project just as it stood. Just said, hey, great, 157 units, go for it. And the developer took that, went to the state, and then went to the Zoning Board of Appeals. The Zoning Board of Appeals could still deny it based on the large project requirement. Is that correct?
Yes, but what would more likely happen is the applicant would come in, even though you approved 157, and even though DHCD approved 157, the application would be for 133.
That's what I thought. Yeah, that was going to be my follow-up question, because they wouldn't risk going before the zoning board with a number that they knew the zoning board could kill them with.
Correct. If I could, Mr. Chairman, just to add this, especially for folks that are not on the board, there are many communities in the Commonwealth that are consistent with local needs. So they have 10% of their housing stock as below market. They meet the large project threshold on a particular case. There are plenty of examples. Amherst is a really good example. Cambridge is another really good example. There are still plenty of comprehensive permit applications in those communities because the developer has already negotiated something, or the municipality wants more below market rate housing. It's kind of an understood arrangement. So it's not that being at 10% is the death blow to comprehensive permit applications. It means the municipality has the same control that it would under normal circumstances. Your zoning ordinance, your zoning bylaw applies. So I just wanted to add that, because getting to 10% or getting to what the regs call safe harbor doesn't mean an applicant can't still keep applying to the town, and the town still has to entertain the application. So you may find that even if you accomplish the safe harbor, you're still looking at new small comprehensive permit projects or rehab of existing structures. So I just want to clarify that, because I think there's a sense out there that once you achieve this status, everything stops. And no, it doesn't. It keeps going. Your numbers are going to keep changing. The census is going to come out this year. You're going to have more units in the numerator this year than you did last year. So things keep changing, and that's why it's not a static process.
Yeah, understood. All right, John Round, I hijacked you briefly. It's back.
No, I was going in that direction. I really needed to kind of get a reference point in terms of where we should be at. I certainly feel that we should be meeting the requirements for our 10%, which is in and around somewhere. I guess we need about 230 housing units, maybe 240 in our housing plan. I see a couple of different numbers. One's at 2275 and other ones at about 2300 right now in terms of the number of housing units. And so you take 10% of that. But I also did see a prediction that probably by the end of this year or so, we'll be up closer to 2450 or 2500. And I think that we do get there's a recalibration of numbers that may kind of take that total number of housing unit stock into account. So I would benchmark our needs or the requirements for this development based upon what our needs are, and perhaps a little bit extra. And in and around the 130 number, 130 to 135 number is where I would prefer to see the housing density come in at here. And as I think I had mentioned earlier, that's just about, it's a little more than 1/4, I guess, of the housing, excuse me, a little less than 1/4 of the housing units that are put out here. But that's what I would like to see this development shrunk down to, in the 130s.
All right, before we all do comments responding to each other, I want to go around the horn once. Jeff, how about you?
Can we get clarification as to the number of existing units?
The number of existing affordable units
Correct.
in town?
Yep. I know that Sue had given us that at one meeting. I looked all through my notes for it and I can't find it. And I didn't have a chance to get in touch with her today.
The number of existing, I don't have in front of me right now. I know that. the
Mr.
number-
Chairman,
Jeff, I
I'll-
have it. It's 115.
Mm,
That's in the housing production plan, the draft, the most recent draft. That was probably, November 24th.
Yes, okay.
And the number that we needed to hit with this development was 120 would leave a little bit of a cushion.
Not according to the numbers that John just went over.
Yeah, well, I was going to get back to that. This was the number 120, the 120 number that was calculated for us came from Sue Brown.
Okay, so that would be 2350 for total units. And what John just said was that there's information that we may be up as high as 2450 at the end of this year.
Right.
I see your point. So the cushion isn't large enough. That's what you're concerned.
Yeah, it's not much of any cushion. So I would echo John's comments that I'd like to get this up into that territory where there's limitations of appeal of any ZBA decision on the comprehensive permit. And reduce it down to, if we went to 135, that would take us to 2,400. No, that would take us to 2,500. So I like that number, that 135 number.
All right. Before we go arguing back and forth, let's keep going. Becky.
I would like a number that could reduce a level, one floor from the building. I don't know if that can be done with the 135. I don't think that it would be financially appealing to the developer, not that that's my concern, but I think the 130, I think we definitely need to be at a number that's going to give us safe harbor. So I'm in agreement with what John has come up with.
Anne.
I don't think we ought to ask the developer to reduce the number at all. He has to reduce it on his own, or he loses the right to appeal. So whether he comes down to 133 or 138, he has to come down to something in that range. And I don't think we should give up anything in the negotiation to get him down to that range. I had another thought and I lost it, but it will come back. The other thing that concerns me is that if he reduces the number of units, or as he reduces the number of units, I'd like to see the reduction done proportionally across the various types of units. That is, he can't just say, okay, I have to reduce it by, what are the 21 or 25 units. I'm going to take it all out of the single bedrooms, because that means that the cost to the town will be approximately the same as it was at 157, and the revenue to the town will be substantially less. So let him do the reduction that he has to do, and our requirement be that if he makes any reduction, it has to be proportional among the 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms and the 1 pluses.
I still want clarification.
On what? Oh, the 1 plus.
Yeah, the 1D, 1 plus, because the 1 plus can give us another school age child, according to the fiscal impact study.
So you're concerned if it's a well, then we don't actually have to do clarification, right? We can simply make it, we can state it as a condition and not bother with clarification.
Well,
Because clarification is something that then can be changed, right? I mean, like
it
that's what.
can. I know. Okay, you're right.
So what it comes down to, what it would come down to is in line with what Ann is discussing, namely that what Ann is proposing, that instead of us talking about number of units at all, you're required to keep the proportions at this percentage 3, this percentage 2, this percentage 1, and this percentage 1 plus. Now, all right, so hang on, making a couple of notes. All right. So far, I haven't expressed an opinion yet, and I'm gonna hold off because I want to poke around a couple of things first before. I want to poke around a couple of items here, motivations and thinking. So I understand the one motivation is the one that was expressed by John and Jeff and Becky was focused around the notion of getting to the safe harbor. And I know that there have been concerns expressed around fiscal impact to the schools, impact to traffic, safety. And I think essentially we said earlier on that the safety concerns that we wanted to be addressed, really, we wanted to make it possible for the zoning board to address the safety concerns of the access road. But as far as the fiscal impact is concerned, there's been this presumption that this development would represent, because of its higher density and residents, a negative impact to the town in finances. And the fiscal impact report didn't really jive with that. It said that it would be in the right configuration, just barely net positive. And is that something that's figuring into board members' thinking here when you're talking about going with the higher number of 130? Jeff, you want to?
Can you restate your question?
Yeah. So the motivation around density is it's multifaceted, right? There's the impact to the impact of a larger number of units on fiscal, cultural, traffic, and some of those items we think are mitigated maybe by the fiscal impact report. But why settle on the 130 number versus saying, you know what, I think the fiscal impact is going to be too high, or some other impact is going to be too high. I'd really rather see 120, 80, 60. I'd like to hear a little bit of discussion from board members about.
Okay. I can respond to that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think when you start to get down below 130, you start to get involved with making decisions about the project that may benefit the town fiscally, but may not lead to the developer being able to build a project that's financially feasible. And that's his exit point for leaving and putting down a much more egregious process with us through the state. So I think it's in the best interest of the town to come to a balance in that, and to reach our affordable housing goals for the near term, so that we can make the plans that were brought up by so many town residents that they'd like to see in place for really truly affordable housing within the town parameters, or at the DPW site, or wherever. So I don't see hitting this magic number as, oh, great, now we're over the finish line with that. We don't have to worry about that ever again, because we do. And we do because there's going to be ways in which there's going to be other development in the town that's going to raise our total housing profile and lead to a higher need for affordable housing to be in the 10% safe harbor. So I don't see it as the be all and end all, but I do see it as the near term goal, so that we can do more thorough planning of affordable housing for our town residents that's truly affordable, and not just affordable within the eyes of 40B.
Okay, John?
Yes, me?
Yeah.
Yep. No, I mean, I agree with Jeff. I didn't really look at the financial angle so much after we got the modeling that came back from the reports last week. And the numbers between 157 and 120 were about the same. And I suspect if you go down to 100, maybe they're the same. They'll start to move a little bit because there are fixed costs that are built into there. But I am, a critical issue here is this affordable housing threshold. And if we don't meet that, we're just going to continue to be risking another run at us by some other developer that says, well, let's put in a 40B over here. And I would much prefer that we be in control of our future in that regard. I think this whole experience is a wake-up call for lots of folks here in town about the 40B legislation and what it does. And we can solve that in the near and intermediate term, I think, with this project. And I think that it means that we will pay more attention to continually looking at how affordable housing can be managed in the future on a more aggressive basis. It's been kind of just pushed around and planning for some time, and we ran out of time. But we have an opportunity to keep moving in the direction and keep kind of keep in keeping with what the 40B requires for the next many years, I think, if we get to the threshold with this right now. And the 130 gets us there.
Becky.
One of the motivations for the number for me is to try to reduce the height of the building, which for a variety of reasons, including fire apparatus. And I would not want to try to put this at such a low number that it precludes any negotiations, because it's cutting our nose off to spite our face if we don't try to come up with some measures that are to the benefit of the town. And knowing all full and well that it goes to the ZBA for the final. But if I just think if we can come at a negotiable number whereby we can find some benefits for the town, rather than just losing it completely to a non-friendly. And I think that this is a reasonable number. I'm concerned with just saying, go for broke and take all of it. Go ahead, 157. That doesn't make me feel comfortable doing that.
I'm not so worried about that, but now he's up against a large project number. He's got to reduce it. I mean, with the opinions in town about this particular development, the zoning board would drop them from 1,000 yards for if you went in at 157 units.
Eli, I realize my time is up for this round, but I meant to comment on the idea of leaving it at 157 and letting him reduce it. I don't want to put the decision-making about how many units in his hands, so that he can just bring it right down to the razor edge of 10%, or maybe even below that. You know, if he works out a way to do that, because that would really screw the town.
In what respect? I mean, we've been talking about 135 was the number you suggested, and the large project number is right around that number.
I understand that it is, and that's, you know, part of why I support the 135. But to leave it in the hands of the developer, he could go to 133. He could go to 132. If he goes down to 132, we lose a whole other unit of affordable housing. Now, I know all the units are counted, whether they're full freight or not.
Mhm.
But you know, the 135 number does provide us with 34 affordable units. And at 25%, it actually is 33.75. And going back to a point that Ann made at an earlier meeting, I think we really need to hold them to 25% and not 39 out of 157. That math doesn't work for me. So I hope I've responded to your question, but my concerns lie with putting this in the hands of the developer to make the decision, as opposed to our recommendation to the developer and negotiating from there.
Okay. At some point in here, I'm definitely going to be bringing John Whitten back into the conversation. But Ann, I wanted to ask you if you could expand on something. So you suggest, like proportions only. Don't bother with the number because you got to come down, and instead negotiate on other aspects. And what other aspects did you have in mind?
As I said before, that he not cut just the single bedroom units, but he cut units proportionally, whether it's his choice or our choice. My concern is that he is currently trying to negotiate deals to reduce with us to reduce from 157. I really don't care very much whether we say, okay, it's 133 or 135. What I don't want us to do is give up anything that we think is important in order to get that reduction, because we get it anyway.
Right. So let's suppose that let's suppose that we said, hey, 135 is the number, and he goes, oh my gosh, that's great, 135. And we knew that he was going to essentially say that. We in some aspects would, like Becky's concern about, would prefer the building to be lower profile. It's a major issue for a lot of people. We'd probably be giving.
May I interrupt for just a second? Back of the envelope, if we reduce from 4 floors to 3, the total number of units is 117, which isn't enough to get us to safe harbor. We could argue that the development needs to be bigger, so it could be lower, but.
Well, I was using that as an example, but in any case, not negotiating on that point really does suggest, for any number of reasons, that we really should focus more heavily on some of the other items. So, for example, if we were very interested in the shuttle service, we might press harder on the developer for funding and supporting that aspect. Or in the other fiscal impacts previously, we'd said, all right, one-time contributions towards certain capital needs, such as money towards fields, money towards ladder truck. Perhaps then we would be focusing on those things, which of course the zoning board can't negotiate on. Is that where something you were considering?
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly, not those specific things, but reducing, this is a counter to asking for some 60% AMI units, insisting that it actually be slightly more than 25% of the units that are affordable rather than slightly less. oh God, all of the environmental things we've been talking about. I think I just wanted to avoid giving him the impression that he's being beaten down on the number of units, and that he should get something for reducing the number of units. We're all in agreement that the number of within maybe 4 units of how many we need. And that's within 4 of how many he can build without giving up his right to appeal from the zoning board of appeals.
John Witten, do you have any input at this point?
I think my input is you do need to drive the number. I wouldn't give it kind of a pass, only because I think you're negotiating with him for project eligibility approval. That has an incredible value to him. So if you're going to take a pass on the density or pick a number, say in the 130s, that still leaves an awful lot of room for the board to negotiate kind of those capital costs that you were describing, Mr. Chairman. So I think by not playing the density game, you're reserving for yourselves an opportunity to negotiate other things. And then let the Board of Appeals negotiate it from there if the site conditions require a smaller project, or there are other reasons why they should reduce the density, subject, of course, to concern that an appeal of their decision will be overturned by the Housing Appeals Committee. And that kind of goes back to that macro condition, no appeal of the Board of Appeals. That's really the most important condition I think the board could try to negotiate for.
Well, we definitely need to have one more little meeting before we have a sit down with the developer.
Eli, I have a question for Mr. Witten. Is there any requirement with regard to the number of bedrooms that the affordable housing offerings must have? I think there's a certain
Yes.
minimum, isn't there, or at least on a
Yeah.
percentage basis? You can't just build a bunch of 1-bedroom places.
No, as of a few years ago, DHCD required comprehensive permits that at least 10% of the units be 3 bedrooms.
This one's at 15 right now, I think. The proposed version is.
The proposed version is exactly at 10% or almost. It's
Yeah.
16 of the 157.
And that's fairly common. The applicants come in with whatever that 10% number is. Rarely have I seen it more than that.
All right, so the affordable housing rules are such that whatever housing you're offering, at least 10% must be 3-bedroom or multi.
Yes.
Okay, 3.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it doesn't comment about 2s or 1s. It just
No.
says 10%. Okay.
Just 10%, 3 bedrooms.
Okay.
Can we cap the 3 bedrooms at 10%?
You could. It's a funny question in the sense that is one of those areas that the Board of Appeals cannot touch at all. Whether it's 80% or trying to negotiate to 60%, additional below market rate units, bedroom count, that was stripped away from boards of appeals about 10 years ago. So if you don't do it, nobody will be able to.
And that's what Ann was advocating for.
Advocating for fewer 3 bedrooms?
No, she was
And-
advocating, we keep the proportions, we lock the proportions in. So we say, whatever number of units you build, the proportions have to be 10% 3,
whatever it currently is for two.
40% for one. Yeah.
Okay.
Uh, so all right, there's this interesting consensus that's building up around this 130-ish number in proportions of units. Other conditions that are listed in the physical impacts. Let's go around the horn and just have board members comment on them. 2, 3, 4, and 5, all in one go. Let's do around the horn once. John Round.
Yep. Yes. So number 2, the water main extension. Yes, I think that certainly has to be involved there, and that certainly has to be in the mix. The professional fees, has that been formally accepted at this point, Eli? Or
What do you mean?
the professional fees for consultants, et cetera?
Oh, what
guess-
about?
But has that been? I know that the developer has paid for the reviews that we have had to date. Is that kind of an open offer, or is it just for the ones that we've done so far?
The ones that we've done today, we haven't discussed any.
Okay, all right. So if there are any additional ones, yes, that belongs in there. I'm okay with number 4 is kind of on a case-by-case basis. And we've discussed that in terms of traffic and other things. With regard to the one-time contributions, I'm in favor of B and C, not so much A, but B and C, which is the a land conservation fund, monies toward that. And I would go with the monies that have been put out here. It's $500,000, and $500,000 toward a turf field project. I think it can be broader than just Sweeney, but just make it athletic fields in general, because I think the Brook Street field is going to need to be replaced sometime in the next couple of years.
Jeff.
I'd like to start out with a question for John, if I could. I'm curious about why you would take out the fire truck.
I'm looking at 3 floors at this point, and I'm not sure that we need the ladder truck for 3 floors. I don't know. I looked at it and
My
I
concern
don't know.
about, of those 3 priorities at the
Yep.
end,
Yeah.
my highest would be for the ladder truck.
Okay. We've
A,
already got
because-
a. Yeah. Go ahead.
Because we have been budgeting for this, and we moved money out of that budget last year, and we've moved money back in, or we're planning on moving money back into that budget this year, to accelerate this so that we have the ladder truck available to us, and it's fully equipped and ready to go when and if this project comes online. Whether it's 3 floors or 4 floors, my concerns about public safety for this project have been very strong ones. And I think that upgraded ladder truck is a really important piece of equipment to our fire department. And to protect the project itself if it's built, and the woods around it if it's built. So that would be my highest, but let me go back as you did through 2 through 5. I think 2 is a very strong concern and needs to be taken care of by the developer. The issues about board's experts, we just discussed. The impacts as determined by the board's experts, we've been going over tonight. And I think we've come to some conclusions about that. So really, this is down to the size of the project, the water main, and the contributions towards capital needs. And I want to suggest that that's not capital needs, but capital impacts. I would suggest leaving those 3 things in place as they are to start the negotiation and work it from a place where if there's places we can give back to get things that we want, that we work it out for those monies. So my feeling is pretty strongly in priority that the ladder truck is number 1 and that the other 2 are very important. So I would keep those 500s right where they are.
Becky.
Regarding, well, I just wanted to reiterate under number 1 was preclude any further additions or expansions. I think that, you know, the developer knows that paying for the water main extension is a given. And payment toward the impacts as determined by the board's experts. The developer did at a meeting agree to this, or so in the last meeting where the traffic, the fiscal and traffic impacts were presented. Under the one-time contributions, I agree. I think even though the ladder truck is something that has been on the plan and has had monies being set aside, the fact that we have, if this development actually goes through, it just underscores the need for a properly equipped truck that could handle anything if it were to happen up there. I agree with that. I think that given the location of this project, the donation, one-time donation to CPC Land Conservation Fund is essential. I'm less concerned about a towards athletic fields at this point. I think that's a luxury and it would be very nice. But I would focus on both A and B. I would also like to add to this list that, and this was something DPW brought up, is that as opposed to the billing for water being done per unit, that it be done as one whole, that the bill come from the development as one, as one bill.
Oh, boy.
I
said, oh, boy.
Yeah. The cost of putting in, 157 or however many different meters and monitoring those and generating individual bills is a pretty significant fiscal impact to the town.
No, it's not. Pay for the meters. Generating the bills is automatic.
Just saying what was in the fiscal impact. And based on what the DPW was requesting, that one bill be generated.
Okay.
I'm no DPW expert. I could try to be, but I don't think it will work.
I have to go back on and review that, but I do have comments. All right. Ann.
Okay. The water main extension, the developer has got to look at that and say, if I don't pay for that, that's going to go to the town meeting. Because that water main needs to be expanded in order to provide adequate water to the development. And I think the developer has a pretty good sense of the way a town meeting is going to approach a bill to enable this development. So that's really it. If he's thinking hard about it, I think he has to recognize that he has to do that. So I wouldn't give up. As for the professional fees and expenses, sure. I don't think it's going to be a lot, at least at the selectman level. I would have to yield to John to find out whether the ZBA gets its experts paid for or not. They certainly should. Intersection improvements, and I don't care about that very much. I have some reluctance about the payment for a new ladder truck, because I think we should continue to look at regional fire equipment, in particular the ladder truck, which is very seldom used, and could be, depending on where it's stored, but it could be shared by the several towns in the region. And I'd rather see, but that's not really important. If the CPC land fund, sure. The 500, the turf fields, I agree with John that not specifically for Sweeney, but for turf fields in general, yeah, we can use that money. But that, again, is just a nice to have. It's not a make or break. And that's my list.
On my list, I agree that they should pay the full cost of the water main extension. They do need it. And in particular, the expansion required because they're doing the development in the first place. Yes, on the payment of all the professional expenses. I think number 4, the payment towards impacts is determined by the board's experts regarding due to traffic impacts. I think that's redundant. I think we've covered that under the traffic impact section. We should just remove it from here because it's just going to add confusion. And then on the capital side, what I would suggest, maybe what we would do is I think that we should keep all 3 of these items in here. And instead, if we want to be more, to tie us down a little bit less so, we could say 500,000 towards the purchase of fire department equipment and leave it at that. It would cover any of the other capital that we have to do for the fire department if we did choose to take a regional solution with respect to the ladder truck. Would leave it up to us where to put it. 500,000 to the CPC Land Conservation Fund, I'm fine with. And then I agree, 500,000 instead of tying it down to the Sweeney Park turf field project. I think just saying $500,000 towards town fields would be the right thing to do. Lord knows, yes, we want to move forward with the Sweeney Park project, but we know how it goes, and you may find that we get into some more of the engineering on that project and go, "Ooh, we don't want to do it right now. We're stuck with 500,000 that's earmarked for the Sweeney Park project, which isn't moving forward right now." So, but I do think that we should put $500,000 in towards athletic fields, because that's one place where this project is, if it does go forward, would have an impact. We continuously find ourselves low on athletic fields for the town. We have for many years. That's been a constant challenge to Parks and Rec and the Fields Committee. And there's no real relief in sight. And regardless of, there's a relatively limited impact to the schools, we think, but there's still those people are going to be using fields. It's highly likely they will be impacting the field use. So I think it's definitely worth us asking them to contribute toward the fields. Now, I would go a step beyond that and suggest that if we were to give up on density, that we do go back and make a stronger calculation with respect to a town shuttle, and have them foot more of the bill on that. I do think that that is our best option for mitigating the impact of traffic downtown and congestion downtown. And if we're giving them room on density, they should certainly be willing to step up and help to mitigate the impact to the downtown area. So I would advocate that ultimately we come down a little heavier on that particular number. I don't know what that number is right now, and you know what? I think it's going to be a little challenging for us to come to an agreement on what that number ought to be before our first round of negotiations with the developer. So John Whitten, some advice on putting stakes in the ground on some of these items as opposed to being specific.
I think that the list is already, overwhelming in a sense for the discussion with the applicant. I wonder if maybe the meeting with the applicant is dealing with the big picture issues, and those would be the cost implications. I think it was my recommendation to the board to cover all the issues, and I think you've done that. But now, listening to them all, I wonder if you might not want to just start when you meet with him on Wednesday with the big one, which is the capital costs, the contributions, the costs beyond what he would otherwise have to do to build the project. Because I wonder, how much deeper you need to go with him before he gives you a sense that, yeah, I'm willing to negotiate on those capital expenditures.
So So the capital expenditures that we just listed purely under the fiscal impact section, not including the runtime costs of something like the shuttle or
But including the
AMI.
number of, the AMI.
Is that what you're saying, John?
It is because if you can reach a consensus with that, then I think the other matters seem less important from a cost perspective. I mean, Mr. Engler did comment on the wetlands bylaw, so we don't know which are the third rails for him. But I think if you can reach consensus on the costs, the real hard costs, then I think you can move to the next level. Otherwise, I wonder if he's not going to get fixated on one issue here, one issue there, but we never really get to the point of the contributions that the select board wants.
Right. All right. How do board members feel about that notion? In the first meeting with the developer, concentrate only on the bulk of the objects within the fiscal impact section. We've refined our what we want to ask out of environmental impacts and traffic impacts, but we would come to those and talk to him about those in a second meeting, or not, if he just says, "Oh, I don't want to talk to you again anymore."
My feeling is to go, I mean, John has the experience. He's done this. I would be inclined to listen to his recommendation. And if that's what he thinks is a good start, I would go with that.
Rest of you folks in agreement with that?
Yep,
Yeah. I think,
take advice.
does it make sense to take out the payment of professional fees as being a relatively unimportant thing?
That makes
John,
sense. Mhm.
John Wooden?
I think that would be fine, Mr. Chairman. And I apologize, I don't remember who asked the question before, whether consulting fees are part of the Board of Appeals process. And the answer is yes. The Board of Appeals can require the applicant to pay for all of their professional services except for legal services.
So we don't expect that we're going to be paying, and we're going to be running up large bills in that area as the Board of Selectmen, I think.
I don't think so. I think that's right.
All right, so then the discussion on Wednesday would be around whatever we talk about for the number of units, including precluding any future additions or expansions. Paying for the water main extension and the one-time capital contributions.
And the intersect, what about number 4?
No, that we said that we would remove that, but I suggested we remove it because it was redundant. And when we talked about the intersection work down under traffic impacts,
Traffic, okay.
we already said we would remove that because that had to do with like roundabouts, because the only recommendations from the traffic expert were around potential roundabouts at the 128, which
Well, and the left turn lane and increasing the shoulder where you would have the left turn lane into the development. he said you should expand the shoulder there on that side as well then.
Okay, that's fair. That actually is a capital
Mm-hmm.
project. People want us to move that up into the fiscal section for discussion on Wednesday.
I think it's small change.
I agree. I don't think it's a whole lot of money compared to the other stuff. And Eli, for number one, you're including the AMI discussion, correct? When we're talking about,
I'm just gonna move that one up right now where it's, I'm gonna move that up from other affordable, other impact up into the fiscal impact.
mhm.
You might split it into two. The 70%
Mm-hmm.
doesn't
Yeah, no, that's
have a fiscal, that doesn't have a fiscal impact.
just put a check mark on that and say sure. So
Eli,
have-
there's one more, the item I brought up about the water bill and the different, that could go down to other impacts. Because I did find where that was on the study. It was on the fiscal impact study, page 9, under Charles Dam, DPW director. And he said the meter costs approximately 200, and costs the department approximately $200 per meter.
Oh, that's true, because we do, for the first meter, the town pays for it. All right, well, we can have the developer pay for the meters.
Or, well, but
Well,
again,
what Chuck was talking about though was meter the building and have that just become part of the rental structure.
Yeah, so I'll tell you what, we can ask for that, but it's, so do you remember, we've had a few
yes,
abatement requests because people have been, where there was an apartment building where there were 24 units
right.
that pushed them right up into one of the mid tiers, and then the water bills were significantly higher. And for 100 and something units, that would push them right on up into the top tier.
Yep.
Where water is billed at $8 per 100 cubic feet. And will be going up at some point in the future, resulting in a relatively nonlinear, well, it's going to be a huge bill and a huge differential compared to, on a huge differential runtime cost compared to individual meters. So I'd be a little bit more inclined to just say, oh, Mr. Developer, you need to pay for the water meters, rather
Yep.
than put him in a position where he's going to do a single meter and then have a big financial impact to his project. It's no skin off our back to send out the bills for the additional meters. That's just software doing that.
Sounds good.
Can we check in with Chuck on that?
Yeah, I certainly will. And I'm putting that down under other impacts,
Mm-hmm.
because that's also a small change. I mean, you're talking 200 to it's $20,000. Yeah, 30,000.
I'd like to understand what people's idea of small change was with the left turn lane. Why that's put into the category of small change. When we've had downtown improvement projects where we've reconfigured a corner of a street that have cost in the realm of $150,000.
I'm happy to discuss it under the Capitol. I agree. It could, it's true. You make a small change to a road and it costs you a fortune.
I mean, I could see $25,000 just to do the traffic impact study.
I see no reason not to give them a heads up on that item next week.
We could
Fine,
ask Chuck. Sorry, Ann, go ahead.
I wasn't thinking of the elaborateness of the downtown. I was thinking of paving another 6 feet. But obviously there will be environmental impacts and everything. By all means, move it back up.
We could ask Chuck to weigh in on that. I mean, he might be able to, if you're touching base with him regarding meters, we could ask it. It does abut wetlands.
Mm-hmm.
So
It's wetland
on the east
on the
side.
east side of the road.
Yeah. Yep. It looks wet. And it's land.
Okay.
John, wouldn't you see any problem moving that one into the next Wednesday's discussion?
No, I don't think there's any bright line as to, right or wrong. I think just let's keep it focused to the bigger issues. And then if we can move it from there, then we can, then you can take it to the next level.
All right. So we still have a little bit more to do here tonight, I'm afraid. One is Anne was going to do a little bit of work on the 60% for AMI for half versus all, and we need to have another discussion around that. So I will be anticipating scheduling a brief meeting next week. And I think, are people going to be available on Wednesday morning?
What time? I mean,
Well, I can make it pretty much as early as we want. We're required to post 48 hours in advance. I think I could get it posted tomorrow. If not, I could post it very early Monday morning. I, can be personally, I'm up as early as 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. I don't think you all want to meet then.
why? Why, I ask you? It's beautiful.
That might be a
time of day.
violation of open meeting law, Eli.
Yeah, it'd be sketchy at the very least. Can we meet at 9 o'clock on Wednesday?
I have an appointment at 10 that I can't change.
And I have to be to work by 9:15.
Physically at work, or you have to, one way or another, you can't be present at a board meeting. No, the reason I asked physically at work is because it takes time to get to be physically at work.
Yes, I leave it. I leave here. I'm in my car at 9 o'clock.
9 o'clock.
Yeah.
So we would need to meet at 8 then. And if we were not quite done by 9, that would still be okay. We'd still have a quorum. You just have to clear your topics before you leave.
Yep.
And I would have to leave at 9:30.
And you'd have to leave at 9:30. So is 8 o'clock Wednesday morning doable for Ann and John?
Yes.
Not happy about it. Neither am I.
Oh, no, it's fine.
Yeah, I can do 8 o'clock.
All right, 8 a.m.
Thank you, everybody. Sorry.
Wednesday. 1:20. 27. So I'll talk to Greg about posting that. And before I forget, I'm going to talk to DPW RU water meters.
Can I call anybody for you, Eli?
No, I got it. Now, and then Ann's going to come back to us with some of her calculations around those numbers at that time for the 60%.
Yep.
Now we have to talk about the number, or if we're going to not make a decision about. I think we are decided, all of us, that we want the proportions fixed. Is that correct? Can I say that much right now?
Yes.
We want the proportions to remain what they are right now.
Yes.
Yes. And we want to include any future additions and expansions. And now the question is, what is that number that we want to begin negotiations for on Wednesday? And there are two ways of going at this. One is we hash it out right now. Two is we go back and get verify the hard calculation on the large project limit number, and verify our calculations with Sue Brown on the 10% SHI number, and then have the discussion about that number, 130, 135, 132, 142 and a half on Wednesday.
Or 142 plus one, a plus.
I'd be happier if we had, because there are a bunch of different numbers of what our current number of households are. They're all fairly close, but I'd like to have Sue Brown add her 2 cents to that.
So Sue Brown, clarify SHI limit number and large project number. All right. All right, I'll get these edits and comments. I'll get together with Greg tomorrow on these edits and comments. Roll another copy of this document to you guys ASAP.
Good.
And I'll cover the ground director on the water meters, and I'll send an email to Sue Brown and Greg asking for the clarification on the SHI numbers and the large project numbers, and Ann's going to go off and do some calculations.
Could I ask for one very small item?
Yep.
Could we correct the spelling for the heading for the second section of this report?
Oh, that environment.
Every time I look at that, it makes my head spin.
Environmental.
The teacher in me, just the hair goes up on the back of my neck.
Can't see it, but done. All right. Well, this has been an interesting conversation. I think it's going to be an interesting.
Probably not to people who are not on the Board of Selectmen.
Oh yeah, I was thinking about that too. Yep. Oh yeah. So on the plus side, I think we resolved how we want to support the zoning board with respect to the safety requirements. Well, no matter what, it was going to be an interesting conversation. All right. anything else board members want to cover tonight?
I'm sorry to ask, but I do have one question.
Motion to adjourn.
I'm just, actually, no, this.
Sorry, Becky, there's a motion on the floor.
I second that emotion.
Any
I can
discussion?
do this. No, I can do this another time.
All right. Any discussion? Roll call vote. Mr. Whitten,
I don't know, Mr. Chairman. I think we have more things to talk about.
yeah, no, I don't know. You know what? I'm not gonna say I'm tired. I'm sleepy, but I'm not tired. Mr. Round, your both names start with John.
Very confusing. But yes, it's past your bedtime, Eli. If you're a 4 o'clock in the morning guy.
I was up at 3:30 this
Oh,
morning. Yep.
So that's when you do your work.
Mhm.
Your for pay work.
Yeah. Mr. Bodmer Turner,
Yes.
Ms. Harrison,
Yes.
Ms. Jakes.
If I must. Yes.
Mr. Blake. Yes. All right. Good evening, folks. Thank you, John Whitten.
You're welcome. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you very much, everybody.
thanks.
Thank you.
John, good
Thank
night.
you.
Good night.
Night, everybody.